What's up everyone, Josh from Xtreme Truck and Auto. Today we are going to be doing a SST kit or a 3.5-inch lift on this 2013 Toyota Tundra. And then also we have a set of wheels and tires we're going to be throwing on it as well. So let's go ahead and get into this install. So we got the Tundra up in the air. Obviously we have the wheels pulled off of it. First thing I'm going to start with on the SST kit, and I do it on, especially on these Toyotas, is the upper control arm. The reason is if you go ahead and do all the spacer, the strut spacer and all that stuff, it can put this at a really weird angle and make it hard to get the control arm off and back on. So that's why I'm starting here. We do need to pull the upper ball joint nut off. This little 10mm that's right here that holds the ABS wire on, and then the control arm nut and bolt. I don't know why Toyota does it this way, but they did is instead of having two upper control arm bolts, they do one really long one. Now keep in mind this can make it a bit of a pain to get this thing out, especially when you have like these hoses and wires and stuff like that there. What I like to do is take my time and wiggle it through all of that. Sometimes you do have to drop the vehicle down or get up into the hood area to help guide that bolt out. We'll get into that if we have to. But for right now, I'm gonna get the upper control arm pulled off and the new rough country control arms put on this thing. So we've got our upper control arm installed. I got that bolt passed. There is a coolant hose of some sort right here that you have to get around, and then there's one tucked up inside that has a plastic bracket. You don't have to remove any of the stuff holding these hoses. You can squeeze it just past. But one thing I definitely don't do is remove the bolt out of its position, so that way it's threaded through the way I need to, so it can just slide back in. It makes life a little bit easier. So I'm gonna go knock out the other side, and then before I move on to doing the spacers and all that fun stuff, I am going to add grease to both of these ball joints. Something that is important, you definitely want to do, because they do not grease them hardly at all, no matter who the lift kit company is. So make sure you're greasing these as well. So real quick, before I get the other side thrown in, I wanted to take a second to show you how big the upper control arm bolt is. To give you a good kind of view, that's the rotor on here, and that's how long that bolt is. So that's what you're going to be fighting when you get the go to remove the upper control arms. Just thought I'd give you guys a little insight into that. I'm going to get the other side thrown in. Got both my upper control arms on. Now the next thing I'm going to be doing is removing this skid plate here, and we're going to be installing diff spacers on that portion right there. It just drops the diff down to keep the CV axles at a better angle. So these are all going to be 12mm holding this on with a few 10s up here. And then we are going to get up under here and remove two of the 19 or 21mm bolts to allow that diff to sag. We're going to get this pulled off. I'll show you guys a better shot of the bolts and the spacers and all that stuff, and then we'll get the diff dropped and move on to the actual lift portion of this. If you peek up under here, I got the skid plate pulled off. The two bolts we're going to be removing are this one and this one. There are nuts on the back side of these bolts, and then we're going to be installing these two spacers in between the frame and the differential bracket, and that'll drop it down and allow the CV axles to be at a better angle. Now one thing other companies do, like Ready Lift and a couple others, I can't remember them offhand, I think it's Super Lift, they make these thread pitch match the factory ones, which on these Tundras is really nice because that nut is a pain in the butt to get into position, especially with washers and everything else. But unfortunately Rough Country chose coarse thread and these are fine thread, so we're gonna have to fight these nuts up into position. So once when I get this installed, I'll bring you guys back in, show you that, and then I will go ahead and throw the spacers onto the skid plate so you can see that, and we'll get that thrown up into position. Our diff spacers are installed. As you can see, they go in between. One thing you will want to keep is there's a big washer right here. You'll want to put that on the bolt, and then they send you a washer for the backside to go in between the nut and the frame. That's kind of how both of those look installed. Over here on the skid plate, we've got our spacers installed. If you can see, I've got the little kind of clips holding them on. It makes it a little bit easier to get it into place. We're gonna leave that skid plate off for now. And what we're going to do is we're going to undo our sway bar bolts, our lower strut bolt, these two lower ball joints here, and then the cam bolts. One thing I will say is I'm going to mark these cam bolts to get it back to close to where it was. That way it's somewhat still in alignment, so it drives okay when we take it to the alignment shop. Let me get all this off and swung down out of the way. One thing I will mention on Toyotas that is very common is these cam bolts do like to seize up, so we will deal with that if we run into it. But until then, let's get rolling. We've got our front end torn apart as far as we need to go. Strut is pulled out. So the next step in my little venture is I'm going to install all of these studs. They send two nuts, the one being a 17 that you're going to use to tighten down and pull that stud tight. We're going to get these studs installed. If you notice, there's one notch or two. The stud side is the 2 notch, so keep that in mind. And then when we go to install them on the strut, if we come over to the strut, not sure, let me kind of dig this out, but you see the arrow pointing out? What that means is that side of the strut needs to basically point away from the frame of the vehicle. And then when we go to install these, the flat edge is going to go towards the frame on here. So the spacer is basically going to go right like so onto the strut. So as you guys can see, I've got the spacer on top. Now keep in mind, you want the flat spot with the notches cut out in it to go towards the frame of the vehicle, so it's going to mount similar to that. One thing I do want to do before I put the strut in is we need to remove the bump stops here, because they do send a spacer with kind of bolt threads on it, and we'll screw that in and then screw the bump stop into that. This can be a bit of a challenge. One thing I do like to do is take Freol and shoot it down into the holes and do my best at hitting the threads of these things, because a lot of dirt and road salts and stuff like that like to build up in here, which could make getting these out a bit of a chore. Let me get these thrown in, get the struts put in, and I will kind of show you the order of chaos that I do to get everything back into place. We've got our little bump stop spacers installed there and there. I got the other side done as well. One thing I do like to do when I'm putting the lower strut bolt in, I'm going to mention it now because I've already done it, is I like to leave these top nuts loose. It allows that strut to kind of pivot into position. Next plan of action is I'm going to try to get the lower ball joints and the sway bar back in. What I'm going to be doing is lifting this vehicle up and then putting a pull jack under the lower control arm, because one thing that can be a bit of a pain on these Tundras is getting that sway bar bolt back into position. So we'll probably go ahead and tighten these top strut nuts while we have it down in this position, but I'm going to set the camera up, kind of let you guys watch what I'm doing. So we've got our skid plate back on. If you can peek right in there, you'll see those spacers that keep it from the diff hitting right there. One thing I did do is that he did not have any bolts in this portion of his skid plate, so I used the ones that came from the back to bolt it on up here. So now that's good and secure. And then the two 10mm that were here, I went ahead and put back in. Everything's nice and tight like I normally do. I always do the CYA mark so we could go through and just know when they come back for their inspection to make sure everything's still good. Makes that a little bit faster, and also gives me a peace of mind where if I feel like I've forgotten something, I can go back and quickly check it. We're gonna move on to the rear now. I gotta pull the tires off. Couple things we're gonna get done back here is we've got to relocate the parking brake cables, a couple of ABS wires, some brake lines, and other things like that. They send all the brackets in there. We're gonna put new shocks on this, and then we need to install the new blocks. So I'm gonna get started on all of that. So back under here, I went ahead and installed the blocks. Now there is a shorter and a longer side to the block. You want to make sure the shorter side goes towards the front of the vehicle. That way it pitches the axle up because you're dropping it down. The other thing we had to do is, if you look right here, we've taken the brake line, tie downs, holder, whatever you want to call them, and we flipped them 180 and reattached them. That allows us to get this bracket on and pull these brake lines up off of the axle. So we've got our one bracket here, we've got another one here that's already installed, and then on the parking brake cable, we've got one here and one on the other side over there. Next up on this to-do list is I am going to be putting the new shocks on, and then that will pretty much wrap up this list. Now, as I was going through the box, I did notice one thing that I had missed on the front is the sway bar drop brackets. So once when I get the rear shocks on, I'm gonna go back to the front, and where they go is just right in between the frame and the sway bar bracket itself. I did end up peeking through the instructions and didn't notice where it said about these drop brackets. So just keep that in mind if you guys do put on one of these SST kits, that they are in the box and they send bolts and all the hardware and stuff you'll need. It's a quick fix, but I did want to point that out to you guys. So let me get the rear done. Let me get the front sway bar drop brackets on there, and then as you can see over there, wheels and tires are being mounted, so we'll get those thrown on. There is one thing I want to explain about the lug nuts before we wrap this all up, but yeah, I'm gonna keep moving and we're just about there. Here at the back, we've got our shocks on, blocks in, all of our brackets. The rear is done. I just got to move the pull jacks out of the way. Up on the front, you'll notice I did get the sway bar drop bracket in. Now, don't forget about this. I would recommend you do this before anything else on the diff drop or whatever. Just get this taken care of right away, or after you remove that. It may be kind of a pain to hold it, but do it before you have all the lift stuff on. It'll make your life a little bit easier, because I did have to fiddle with it to get it to go in, but I got it. Now I'm going to take you over here to my workbench because we've got the wheels and tires mounted and balanced. I wanted to talk to you guys about these lug nuts. So what I have here is the factory lug nut, and if you notice, it's got like this sleeve, and what the sleeve does is actually fits inside the wheel, and then it has the seat as well. Now on Toyotas, the stud tends to be a little bit shorter. So when you put an aftermarket wheel on, most aftermarket lug nuts look like this. It's just a conical seat. It honestly does not give you enough thread engagement if you use just a basic lug nut, depending on the wheel, whatever else. So whenever we have a Toyota come in, we use what's called an ET style. And if you notice, we get probably 4 extra threads of engagement before the seat hits the wheel and you tighten it down. So I always recommend that you guys do ET styles if you're doing wheels on a Toyota. It just gives you that extra thread of engagement, because I'd rather have, for example, I'm just throwing this out, a number out there, 7 threads of engagement as opposed to just 3. So keep that in mind. Now, I am going to throw the wheels and tires on and bring you guys back in so that way you can kind of see how everything looks. And then we should be all finished with this build. So that's it when it comes to the SST kit on this 13 Tundra. If you guys have any questions on the video or about the vehicle or the kit, go ahead and drop them in the comments below. Once again, I do keep an eye on those. So if you guys like this video, make sure you give it a thumbs up and you're subscribed, and I'll catch you on the next one.